So, welcome to Lockdown Economics. In this video, I really want to look at the prospects for the UK economy in particular, and what are the prospects of recession, and how big will the recession be that we have. And then I'll look at some more general economic and social observations later on in the video. I think what's quite interesting is compared to 1918, when governments, if anything, ignored and played down the Spanish flu, as it was called at the time, and then 500,000 people died worldwide. I think the government particularly realised that although there's a trade-off between economic growth on the one hand and the mortality rate on the other, that we really need to get the mortality rate down. And this was particularly after the government received the modelling from Imperial College. So I think another aspect of this is great to see the experts have come back big time. People who are virologists or epidemiologists or mathematical modelling of what's likely to happen. And coming to the economic aspect, if we have the alphabet of recessions, what sort of recession are we likely to have? Because I think, the vast majority of economists agree that we're going to have a pretty big recession. And the question really is, how long will it last? So will we have a V-shaped recession? This will be the best. Or we have a quick fall in output, a quick fall in income and expenditure, and then we recover really quickly, say next year. So 2020, a really tricky year. 2021, we bounced back to where we were, and then we continued upward growth. And that bounce back, that recovery, can be pretty fast economic growth. That's the optimistic scenario. This occurred in the US in 1953, and to an extent in the UK in 1979, after Mrs. Thatcher was elected, and then re-elected in 1983. Of course, we could have a U-shaped recession, and I think this is characteristic of the financial crisis, where you go down. Some people describe it as a bathtub recession. You slip down and you're on the bottom for quite a while. It took the UK economy at least 5 years to recover and get back to where we were again. That's 5 years of lost output. And then you come up the other side. Or I think that makes some sense to look at a W-shaped recession. That's when you come down. Some people call it a double dip recession. So you have recession, recovery, and that might be particularly linked to the virus. If we think there's the possibility of a second wave of the virus, which was particularly the case for the 1918 Spanish flu, when the second wave killed far more people than the first wave. And then, of course, worst of all, you could have an L-shaped recession. This is when you crash down like Japan and you have a lost decade. In fact, in the case of Japan, it was probably more or less a lost 2 decades. Again, Greece had an L-shaped recession, you could argue. It took 10 years, another decade really, to recover from 2007, 2008. So the question, what's special about this recession is that it's simultaneously a negative demand side shock and a negative supply side shock. And it's unusual for a recession to be caused by both. Let's first of all look at the negative demand side shock. I think we have some data here. You can see here, I hope you can see here, this Heath Robinson approach, there's a massive fall in football. So deliberately we are constraining the economy, we're deliberately halting the economy, we're suppressing demand, we're suppressing consumption. So all those people that want to go shopping, drinking, eating, to the cinema, to the theatre, they can't because of lockdown. And remember, a quarter of the world is currently in lockdown. And as you can see, it's had a significant effect, and that's what we want. So I think I've got another graph which is pretty useful on this. Let's see. Here we can see a huge fall in purchasing, and that indicates, if you look at the data on there, we've got a pretty sharp decline occurring. And this is a forward-looking index. In other words, what purchasing managers buy now reflects output in the future. So very useful forward-looking data there, what we'd call a forward-looking indicator. So it's likely that consumption will fall hugely. Some people argue by about a third. Investment, another component of aggregate demand, will fall hugely as people put off investment decisions. Now, if we recover, of course, quickly, those will come back quite quickly, as will people's consumption decisions, which is why the bounce back can be quite significant, and you could grow at a really fast rate of growth, like 4, 5, 6% in the UK economy as you recover from this kind of V-shaped recession. However, that is certainly looking at it optimistically. Obviously, exports are going to fall, and then what you'll get combined with this is, as people's incomes fall, they'll cut consumption. Other people's incomes will fall, so you cut consumption, and this process continues, called a negative multiplier effect. So that will come in, and so if you look at the Capital Economics prediction, they predict that the UK economy in this second quarter, that's the second set of 3 months, will decline between 10 and 20%, they argue. Originally they argued only 5%. But take the average of that, say it's 15% in the second quarter. That is absolutely colossal and unprecedented, as you can see from this graph here. This is way bigger than anything that we saw in the financial crisis, and this is unprecedented. The biggest quarterly fall in the UK in recent times, as in the modern period, is something like 2.5% in a quarter, and we're talking about a fall of 10 or 20%. Some people argue it could be as much as 30%. Now, as the previous Governor of the Bank of England put it, of course, this is because we want this to happen, because we want to suppress the virus, and we also want to suppress demand. And so when we let the foot off the brake, then demand could possibly bounce back, in which case we would have a V-shaped recession. But simultaneously, what's happened and happening is we have a negative supply side shock, so that supply chains have been hugely disrupted. That occurred even in Britain in January. Companies like Jaguar Land Rover finding it really hard to get supplies from China, beg your pardon. And of course, labour input has fallen. People are working from home. People are off sick. Companies are beginning to go into liquidation. Schools are closed, which means, again, parents aren't working unless they're key workers at their place of work. And looking at the we'll come back to working from home later and its implications. So what's likely to happen? So the supply side means if we knock out part of the economy, it will be slow to recover. We're more likely to be in a U-shaped recession. Coming to unemployment, if we look at some extraordinary data, this is the surge that there's been recently in universal credit payments. And that graph there, in 9 days, there have been something close to 500,000 new claimants for, can you see that okay, for social security, for universal credit. And that indicates that unemployment could rise steeply. And if that is the case, you're going to have a bigger negative multiplier effect. And Capital Economics predict that unemployment will only rise by something like 6 or 8%. And if that's the case, then that's very fortunate. But there's a danger that if unemployment rises more and a lot of firms go into liquidation, something called hysteresis occurs. That's when you lose part of the economy. Say people lose their skills, they lose their work disciplines because they're unemployed, they remain unemployed for long term, and this is called hysteresis. Again, if we lose part of the supply side of the economy, if we lose many firms going to liquidation, then we're going to end up with a very long, slow recovery. So whether it's V, coming back to these alphabet letters of recession, will it be V, U, or W, do you think? Or even L? Rubini, the economist that predicted the 2008 crash, talked about an I-shaped recession where you just go down and down and down. To my mind, he seems overly pessimistic, but then he was right in 2008. And yeah, whether it'll be a V, U, or W recession, I think very much depends upon government policy. It depends on fiscal policy, that's policy on taxation, government expenditure. It depends on monetary policy. And also it depends on the virus itself and our research and development in relation to that. I'll come back to that. So the first thing, if we look at a typical business, here's a very simple graph. We look at the top graph. We've got business revenue here. So what happens, this is a simple graph where the revenue for a business, that's the income they receive from sales, obviously crashes for most businesses. Albeit it doesn't crash if you're a supermarket, but certain sectors of the economy will really suffer, of course, like airlines, travel, hospitality, entertainment, and non-food retail. So there's a huge crash in sales. And then there's basically along here, before sales pick up again, so here sales pick up again, of course, because we've ended the repression, we've ended the lockdown. Yeah, at some point that will happen. You're going to end up with this huge cash flow problem. If your costs are up here, if you've got significant fixed costs such as rent to pay on premises, then you're going to end up with an enormous cash flow problem, and you might go into liquidation at some point along here. So what's crucial, absolutely crucial, is that the government supports businesses at this point, like tax holidays, for example, or other forms of subsidy to enable a business to continue as a business and not to go bankrupt. The employment subsidy recently introduced in the UK by the Chancellor is very significant in this respect, because it means businesses can hold on to workers and prevents unemployment from increasing. This diagram here, for those that do economics, is you've got your this is where we are at the moment, and then this diagram is meant to indicate a sudden shift in aggregate demand to the left, and also simultaneously a shift in aggregate supply, short ag supply, to the left, which means we have an enormous negative output gap, which is our recession. Firstly, I think what's crucial is people talk about a stimulus package. So what we need here is, after we've lifted controls, we need to stimulate the economy to get demand back up to its previous levels. And that's when helicopter money might come in, which is where we just give everybody some cash. I'll look at that in a later video. Here, we need help on the supply side to prevent firms from going into bankruptcy. So far, there have been great, what you might call Keynesian fiscal measures in the UK. Even in the budget before extra action was taken, our national debt is likely to increase above 2 billion. In the United States, we've introduced a 2 trillion stimulus package. So that looks good. On the monetary policy side, the central banks are taking unprecedented action. And this indeed is in many ways unprecedented. So you could argue that that will save the supply side of the economy, and we, if we're lucky, are going to have a really steep, unprecedented recession in the second quarter. It'll average out better over the whole year. By the way, the technical definition of a recession in economics is 2 successive quarters of negative growth. We're very likely to hit that negativity, but the key thing is we could bounce back. The other thing is it depends on the virus. If we're able to develop something like antibody testing and much more extensive testing, which I suppose is the case in South Korea, then we won't need such a big lockdown on us socially and of course on the economy. So consumption could pick up again. So it very much depends whether we're able to develop effective testing, and also it depends on the virus itself. If it was a second wave of viral infections, then it's likely that we did end up with a W type recession, because one way of looking at it is like an a brake. We've put the brake on, we've stopped the virus spreading to a large extent through a lockdown. When we let that off, it's likely that infections will take off, the economy will expand, and then we'll have to put our foot on the brake again, thereby deliberately crashing the demand side of the economy. One point to make, of course, with the government providing employment assistance at 80% of the employee's wage up to a certain level, this is likely to keep incomes going even if expenditure falls, which is another way of looking at GDP. Economists measure GDP either basically in terms of total income or total expenditure. Anyhow, I think some general observations to come out of this is that maybe working from home is more productive than people might have thought. And so working from home might become a greater habit, and less travel, especially international business conferences, might become a greater habit. It's possible that there are therefore environmental benefits. Air quality has improved considerably. Key workers matter, so maybe there's a re-evaluation as to who matters in the economy, and key workers such as cleaners are in this context as important maybe as a chief executive, as important or more important than someone who trades in the futures markets. Are we looking at the role of big government again? After World War II, government became bigger, similarly after World War I as a percentage of GDP. And so it's possible that with things such as renationalisation of the railways just taking place just like that de facto, that we're looking at the government having a bigger role in terms of directing the economy and in terms measured by a percentage of GDP. What about globalisation? Are we going to see the reversal of globalisation, with firms reducing supply chains to make them less vulnerable? And are we going to see an enhanced role, however, on the other side, for global governance? So organisations such as the World Health Organization that are critical in terms of coordinating our international responses to global problems. And are we going to see a return to collectivism? Obviously, public health is crucially important and a collective entity. And it's, as I said, it's good to see that the experts are back. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope those are interesting questions to pose. So thanks a lot for watching. Bye.